Rain pelted the windshield of David's decade-old sedan, each drop illuminated briefly by the procession of headlights sweeping up the curved driveway ahead. Through the blur, the Hartwell estate emerged like a fever dream, all limestone and glass, bathed in amber light that spilled from tall windows onto manicured grounds. David's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, his wedding band long gone but the pale indentation still visible in certain light. "Daddy, are those real lions?" 6-year-old Sophie pressed her face against the passenger window, pointing at the stone sentinels flanking the entrance. "Just statues, sweetheart." His voice sounded hollow even to himself. He glanced down at his shoes, Italian leather once expensive but now cracked at the creases, polished desperately this morning in a futile attempt at dignity. A valet in a crisp uniform approached, eyebrows lifting slightly at the contrast between David's car and the gleaming luxury vehicle surrounding them. Beside him, Nadia sat perfectly still, her borrowed dress a deep emerald that caught the light when she breathed. Her hands were folded in her lap, knuckles white. "We don't have to do this," she whispered, not looking at him. David watched as Rebecca's parents emerged under a large umbrella, their faces set in the same disapproving expression he remembered from 7 years ago. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think we do." 3 weeks earlier, David had first noticed her in Westside Park. Not because she stood out, quite the opposite. She had mastered the art of invisibility that the unhoused often perfect, occupying a bench with such stillness that hurried commuters flowed around her without registering her presence. What caught his attention was the book balanced on her knees, a weathered copy of Steinbeck's East of Eden. He might have walked past like everyone else if Sophie hadn't dropped her stuffed rabbit directly in the woman's path. When the stranger picked it up, her movements were deliberate, almost regal. "I believe this belongs to you, young lady." Her voice carried the faintest trace of an accent David couldn't place. Eastern European, perhaps. "Thank you," Sophie replied with the solemn formality of children. "His name is Hopscotch." "A pleasure to meet you both." The woman nodded, already retreating back into her invisible bubble. David hesitated. The invitation to Rebecca's wedding had arrived that morning, an embossed card that might as well have been edged with poison. "Good book," he said, gesturing to Steinbeck. She looked up, surprised at being addressed. "The best stories are about people fighting their own nature." Something in her eyes, intelligent, wary, but not defeated, made him linger. "I'm David. This is Sophie." "Nadia." She didn't offer more. They stood in awkward silence until Sophie tugged at his hand. "Daddy, I'm hungry." "There's a cafe around the corner," he found himself saying. "Would you like to join us? As thanks for rescuing Hopscotch." Nadia's hesitation was palpable. "I don't accept charity." "It's not charity if you help me explain to my daughter why people do bad things to people they once loved." The words escaped before he could censor them. A shadow of understanding crossed her face. "That," she said with unexpected gentleness, "is a conversation worth having over coffee." "She left when I was little," Sophie explained to Nadia as they sat in David's kitchen 2 weeks later. "But she sends me presents on my birthday." David winced at his daughter's matter-of-fact recitation of abandonment. Nadia, now wearing clean jeans and a sweater borrowed from David's sister's donation pile, nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes people leave because they're scared," Nadia said, helping Sophie arrange plastic dinosaurs in a complex battle formation on the table. Not because they don't love you. David turned away, ostensibly to check the pasta sauce simmering on the stove. In the 2 weeks since their chance meeting, Nadia had gradually revealed fragments of her story: a respected professor of linguistics in her home country, a political asylum claim that had gone sideways, savings depleted by medical bills after pneumonia. Never once had she asked for anything, accepting his offer of the pull-out couch with reluctance only after he'd framed it as help with Sophie while he worked late shifts. "The invitation says +1, he said abruptly. "Come with me." Nadia looked up, her expression unreadable. "To your ex-wife's wedding?" "I need to go for Sophie's sake. To show her that I'm okay with it." He wasn't, not remotely, but his therapist had emphasized the importance of modeling healthy acceptance. "And you think bringing a homeless woman as your date demonstrates emotional stability?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were serious. "I think bringing a brilliant linguist who speaks 5 languages and can discuss Steinbeck demonstrates I have excellent taste in friends." He stirred the sauce with unnecessary vigor. "Besides, Rebecca always said I was too predictable." Nadia's laugh was unexpected, a rich, genuine sound that made Sophie look up in delight. "Well," she said, "I've never been anyone's revenge date before." "Not revenge," David corrected. "Reclamation." The dress had been his sister Claire's idea. "If you're going to make a statement, make it properly," she'd insisted, dragging them to a boutique where the price tags made David's stomach clench. Nadia had protested until Claire cut her off. "Consider it a loan. You can return it after." Now, watching Nadia emerge from his sister's guest bathroom, David understood the power of transformation, not because the dress had changed her, but because it revealed what had been there all along. The emerald silk draped over her collarbones, highlighting the elegant line of her neck and the quiet dignity she carried even when wearing donated clothes. "You look," he began. "Clean," she suggested with a half-smile. "Formidable," he finished. Something flickered in her eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of the self she had been before circumstance had stripped away her external markers of identity. Claire circled her, making minor adjustments to the dress. "The necklace is the final touch," his sister declared, fastening a simple silver pendant around Nadia's neck. "Mom's. She'd approve." Nadia touched it gently. "I can't." "Just for tonight," Claire insisted. "Every warrior needs armor." In the corner, Sophie watched with wide eyes, her flower girl dress laid out on the bed. "You look like a queen," she whispered to Nadia. David felt something shift in his chest, not the bitter satisfaction he had anticipated, but something warmer and more dangerous. This wasn't about Rebecca anymore. The drive to the Hartwell estate had been quiet, punctuated only by Sophie's occasional questions about the wedding. Nadia had stared out the window, her profile etched against the gathering storm clouds. "Why did you say yes?" David finally asked. "To coming tonight?" She didn't answer immediately. "When you lose everything," she eventually said, "you become a ghost. People look through you. After a while, you start to wonder if you're still real." She turned to face him. "You saw me. Not just the homeless woman, but me. I suppose I wanted to remember what it feels like to be visible again." "I know something about invisibility," he admitted. "After Rebecca left, people stopped seeing me too. I became the abandoned husband, then the single dad, never just David anymore. And what does just David want from tonight? He considered lying, then decided against it. I don't know anymore. When I first got the invitation, I wanted to show her that she didn't break me. Now. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Sophie, who was whispering secrets to Hopscotch. Now I think I just want to prove to myself that I'm not broken. Nadia's hand briefly touched his arm, a gesture so light he might have imagined it. Then we shall be unbroken together, if only for one evening. The Hartwell ballroom hummed with the particular energy of wealth, conversations conducted at precisely the right volume, laughter that never became too enthusiastic, string quartet notes floating above it all like butterflies. David stood at the entrance, Sophie's small hand in his, Nadia a steady presence at his side. For a moment, no one noticed them. Then, like a wave receding, the conversations nearest the door faltered. Heads turned. A path seemed to clear through the crowd, revealing Rebecca at its center. She was beautiful, she had always been beautiful, in a designer gown that probably cost more than David's annual salary. Her new husband, a cardiothoracic surgeon with political connections, stood beside her, one proprietary hand at the small of her back. The perfect tableau of success. Until she saw David. Saw Nadia. Rebecca's practiced smile flickered, then reasserted itself with visible effort. She whispered something to her husband and began moving toward them with the determined grace of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. David. You came. Her voice was warm, her eyes calculating as they swept over Nadia. And you brought a friend. Rebecca, this is Nadia Novak, David said, surprised at the steadiness of his own voice. Nadia, my ex-wife, Rebecca. Nadia extended her hand with a poise that made Rebecca's polished confidence seem suddenly artificial. Congratulations on your marriage. The venue is exquisite. Something in Nadia's accent caught Rebecca's attention. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Novak, that sounds familiar. Have we met? I don't believe so. I would remember. A small frown creased Rebecca's forehead. Are you in academia, by chance? I was, yes. Comparative linguistics at Charles University in Prague. Rebecca's expression changed so rapidly that David almost missed the transition, recognition, disbelief, then a carefully constructed neutrality. Dr. Novak? The Nadia Novak who published the groundbreaking paper on Proto-Slavic influence on modern European languages? Nadia inclined her head slightly. You're familiar with my work? Yes. My doctoral advisor cited you extensively. Rebecca's gaze darted between David and Nadia, recalculating. Your research was revolutionary. Then you disappeared from academic circles. Everyone wondered. Life takes unexpected turns, Nadia said simply. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Let us know your story in the comments. The silence that followed was electric. David watched as Rebecca struggled to reconcile the renowned academic she apparently admired with the woman on David's arm, the woman she had instantly categorized as someone beneath notice. Mommy, Sophie's voice broke the tension. I brought Hopscotch to see you get married. Rebecca's face softened as she knelt to Sophie's level. He looks very handsome today, sweetheart. She glanced up at David. She's grown so much. Children do that, he replied, the words less bitter than he'd expected them to be. Rebecca stood, composing herself. "Well, I should greet my other guests. The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. Your table is near the front, David, for Sophie's sake." As she walked away, David felt Nadia's hand slip into his. "Are you all right?" she murmured. He realized with surprise that he was. The anticipated pain had dulled to something more like nostalgia, a recognition of a past that no longer defined him. "Yes," he said. I think I am. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that expensive things often are, flawless, choreographed, lacking only the imperfection that makes moments truly memorable. David watched Rebecca recite her vows with the strange detachment of watching a movie about someone else's life. Beside him, Nadia sat with perfect posture, her eyes occasionally drifting to the ornate ceiling of the ballroom. Once, she leaned close to whisper, "The architectural details are neoclassical revival. Probably 1920s. He bit back a smile. Of course she would notice that. At the reception, they were seated at a table with Rebecca's academic colleagues, a deliberate placement that David initially interpreted as an insult until he realized it was Nadia they were fascinated by. Within minutes, she was engaged in a spirited discussion about linguistic drift with a silver-haired professor emeritus, her hands moving expressively as she explained a complex theory. "Your date is remarkable," the professor told David during a lull in the conversation. Her work on comparative phonology was groundbreaking. We all wondered what happened to her after Prague. David watched Nadia charm the table, her intelligence and warmth drawing people to her like moths to flame. "Life happened," he said simply. Later, as the dancing began, he found himself standing with Nadia at the edge of the floor, watching Rebecca and her new husband perform their carefully rehearsed first dance. "She keeps looking at you," Nadia observed. "At us," David corrected. "She's trying to figure out how the predictable ex-husband she left behind somehow knows the brilliant Dr. Novak." Nadia's smile was tinged with sadness. "The brilliant Dr. Novak who now sleeps on park benches. Who temporarily lacks housing," David countered. "Who hasn't lost herself despite losing everything else." The music changed to something slower, more intimate. David hesitated, then held out his hand. "Would you dance with me, Dr. Novak?" Her hand in his felt right in a way he wasn't prepared for. As they moved onto the dance floor, he was acutely aware of the eyes following them, Rebecca's, her parents, the other guests who had been prepared to pity the discarded husband but now found themselves intrigued by the unexpected narrative unfolding before them. "They're all watching," Nadia murmured, her cheek close to his. "Let them," David replied. "For tonight, let's both be visible." As they turned, he caught Rebecca's gaze across the room. For a moment, something like regret flickered across her face, not for the marriage she'd ended, but perhaps for the man she'd never truly seen. David nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than forgiveness. Then he turned away, focusing instead on the woman in his arms, on Sophie twirling happily with her grandfather near the dessert table, on the unexpected future opening before him, unplanned, unpredictable, and entirely his own. The music shifted again, and the dance floor filled with other couples. David felt Nadia relax slightly in his arms, her guard lowering as they moved together with surprising synchronicity. "You dance well for a man who claims to have spent the last 3 years watching animated movies with a 6-year-old, she teased. Sophie and I practice in the living room. She stands on my feet. The memory warmed him, their Friday night dance parties, twirling around their small apartment to whatever pop song had captured his daughter's imagination that week. Nadia's expression softened. "You're a good father, David." Before he could respond, the orchestra paused, and the wedding planner's voice rang out, announcing the traditional father-daughter dance. Rebecca and her father took the floor, her white gown billowing around them as they began a carefully choreographed waltz. "She looks happy," Nadia observed. "Yes," David agreed, surprised to find he meant it. "She does." As the dance concluded, Rebecca's father raised his champagne glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to my beautiful daughter and her brilliant husband," he announced. "And to invite all fathers and daughters to join us on the dance floor." David felt a small hand tugging at his sleeve. Sophie looked up at him, her eyes bright with excitement. "Daddy, that's us." He glanced at Nadia, who nodded encouragingly. "Go," she said. "This moment is yours." David led Sophie onto the dance floor, lifting her so she could stand on his shoes as they'd practiced at home. Around them, other fathers and daughters joined in, Rebecca's cousins with their children, friends with their little girls. David caught Rebecca watching them, something unreadable in her expression. "Higher, Daddy," Sophie commanded, and David obliged, lifting her into the air and spinning her around. Her delighted laughter rang out, clear and uninhibited, cutting through the polite restraint of the elegant gathering. Several guests turned to smile at them, charmed by the genuine joy radiating from the child. When the music ended, applause rippled through the ballroom. As David carried Sophie back toward their table, Rebecca intercepted them. "She's so happy with you," she said quietly, her perfect makeup unable to conceal the hint of wistfulness in her eyes. "I made many mistakes, David, but I'm glad she has you." For years, he had imagined this moment, Rebecca acknowledging what she had thrown away. In his darkest fantasies, he'd pictured himself responding with cutting words that would make her regret her choices. Instead, he found himself simply nodding. "We're doing fine," he said, neither accusation nor absolution in his tone. Just truth. Rebecca's gaze drifted to Nadia, who stood chatting with the linguistics professor. "Your friend, Dr. Nov." Rebecca's gaze drifted to Nadia, who stood chatting with the linguistics professor. "Your friend, Dr. Novak, she's not just your date, is she?" David considered the question. "Nadia is someone who reminded me that being seen for who you truly are is the rarest gift." Something like understanding passed between them, perhaps the first honest exchange they'd had in years. Rebecca squeezed Sophie's hand once more, then turned back toward her new husband and the life she had chosen. The evening progressed into that golden hour when celebrations reached their peak before beginning their gentle decline. The cake had been cut, toasts delivered, and the dancing had become less formal, more joyous. David found himself at the bar, ordering sparkling water for Nadia and himself. "Your ex-wife's colleague cornered me by the dessert table," Nadia said, appearing at his side. "He offered me a visiting lecturer position at the university." David nearly dropped the glasses. "Nadia, that's incredible." She accepted the water, her expression guarded. "It's temporary. 1 semester. But it would mean a way back," he finished for her. "A foot in the door." She nodded, taking a careful sip. He said my work is still respected. That what happened in Prague was understood by those who matter in the field. David wanted to embrace her but sensed her fragility in this moment. You deserve this chance. It would mean staying in the city. Her eyes met his, a question in them she wouldn't voice. Before he could respond, a commotion near the center of the room drew their attention. Rebecca's mother was frantically signaling the wedding planner, pointing toward the ceiling where one of the elaborate floral arrangements had come partially loose from its mooring. It swayed precariously above the table where Rebecca and her husband sat, oblivious to the danger. Without hesitation, Nadia set down her glass and moved swiftly across the room. David watched in astonishment as she calmly approached the head table, said something to Rebecca that made her look up, then smoothly guided both bride and groom away from their seats. Seconds later, the massive arrangement crashed down, shattering crystal and scattering flowers across the exact spot where they had been sitting. A shocked hush fell over the room, followed by gasps and exclamations. Rebecca stood frozen, staring at the destruction that had nearly befallen her, then turned to Nadia with naked gratitude. You saved us, she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. How did you know? The support wire was fraying, Nadia explained simply. I noticed it earlier but thought it had been addressed. Rebecca's new husband, shaken but composed, stepped forward. Thank you, Dr. Novak. Your quick thinking prevented what could have been a serious injury. Word spread quickly through the ballroom. The mysterious Dr. Novak had saved the bride and groom. Suddenly, Nadia found herself the center of attention, receiving thanks and admiration from guests who had barely glanced at her earlier. David watched as she handled the attention with grace, deflecting praise while accepting a glass of champagne from Rebecca's father. To Dr. Novak, the older man announced, raising his glass. Who quite literally saved the day. The guests echoed the toast enthusiastically. David caught Nadia's eye across the room and saw in her face a complex mixture of emotions, discomfort at the spotlight, but also the unmistakable relief of being seen, acknowledged, respected once again. Rebecca approached David as the excitement began to settle. Your date is extraordinary, she said quietly. I misjudged both of you. People often do, he replied without rancor. She studied him for a moment. You've changed, David. Not changed, he corrected gently. Just become more fully myself. The rain had stopped by the time they left the reception, the night air washed clean and fragrant with wet earth. Sophie had fallen asleep in David's arms, hopscotch clutched to her chest. Nadia walked beside them toward the car, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. You really did steal the show, David said as the valet brought his sedan around. Nadia laughed softly. Not exactly how I planned to make an impression. The best moments rarely are planned. He settled Sophie carefully into her car seat, tucking a blanket around her. When he straightened, Nadia was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What happens now? She asked. Now, he said, we drive home. You consider that teaching position. I make pancakes in the morning. Beyond that. He shrugged. We stop being ghosts. Just like that? No, he admitted. Not just like that. It will be complicated and messy and uncertain. But I think, he reached for her hand, I think perhaps we could navigate that uncertainty together. Nadia's fingers intertwined with his, warm and real. "I've spent 3 years being invisible," she said softly. "Tonight, when everyone was looking at me, the only gaze that mattered was yours." David thought of all the paths that had led them here: Rebecca's abandonment, Nadia's fall from academic grace, chance encounters and borrowed dresses, and the peculiar courage of starting over. None of it predictable, all of it necessary. "Take the teaching position," he said. "Stay. Not on my couch, that was always temporary. But in the city. In our lives. Are you certain?" Her voice held the caution of someone unaccustomed to hope. In answer, David leaned forward and kissed her, not a passionate declaration, but a gentle promise. When he pulled back, her eyes remained closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sensation. "I'm certain of very little," he admitted. "Except that some stories don't end where you expect them to." Nadia smiled then, a full, unguarded expression that transformed her face. In linguistics, we call that a narrative disruption. When the expected pattern breaks, creating new meaning. From the back seat, Sophie stirred slightly. "Daddy? Are we going home now?" "Yes, sweetheart," he answered, his eyes still on Nadia. "We're going home." As they drove away from the Hartwell estate, David glanced in the rearview mirror. The mansion glowed against the night sky, beautiful and remote, a world he had once desperately wanted to belong to, now receding into the distance. Beside him, Nadia gazed forward, her profile illuminated by passing streetlights, each flash revealing another facet of the remarkable woman who had entered his life by chance. The future stretched before them, unwritten but suddenly rich with possibility. Not a fairy tale ending, neither of them believed in those anymore, but something rarer and more valuable, a new beginning, earned through loss and resilience, witnessed and true.